And welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, and today's guest is Francis Weller. Francis is a psychotherapist, he's an author, he is a speaker, a workshop host. He's got decades of experience practicing psychology, specifically around topics related to soul and grief. He describes himself in this conversation as a soul tracker. And holy moly, you need to listen to all of this podcast. You need to listen to it all the way through. Don't skip ahead. Don't listen for 5 minutes and then shut it off. Like, listen to this conversation. This man drops wisdom. Like various times I found myself smiling or trying to stifle a giggle because what he just told me short-circuited my brain and triggered some feelings in my heart. He's wise. He's so embodied in his knowledge and his presence. He's one of the rare ones that I have found that shows up in this life and in this space with this kind of eerie, poetic sensibility while simultaneously describing giant ideas and topics. Stephen Jenkinson is another one. If you haven't listened to those episodes with Stephen, you can find them on this podcast. But Francis Weller, we talk about grief, we talk about collective grief, we talk about the current state of the planet, we talk about my van, we talk about the 5 gates of grief and how to begin it, we talk about life, just big life stuff, about how we all are collectively feeling wounds or a lack of belonging or fear or shame, and what we can do about that. So this is a big one. Get a pen and paper ready. Prepare to have your mind kind of blown, have your heart spun around a few times. But you're going to like this one, I promise. Without further ado, here's Francis Weller. This episode is brought to you by Cured Nutrition. Cured is the leader in CBD supplementation with an entire line of products designed to take your everyday life to its ultimate potential. Their daily staples are formulated with an in-house clinical herbalist, which has taken the traditional CBD regimen to an entirely new level of optimization. If you're anything like me, you like waking up feeling good and living well. You've probably toyed around with the idea of finding healthy alternatives to jumpstart your morning. Personally, it's why I start my day with Cured Rise, which is their focus supplement. It's a powerhouse blend of functional mushrooms like lion's mane and cordyceps, broad-spectrum CBD, and powerful adaptogens. It gives me clean, clear, and sustained energy without any of the caffeine jitters or crash that I get with coffee. After I get going, Aura is next. It's another blend of functional mushrooms, CBD, and adaptogens, but it's got a twist. We all know how important it is to sustain our immunity nowadays, and this covers all of my bases. The vitamin D, prebiotics, crucial antioxidants are delivered straight to the gut, which is the foundation of our emotional and physical health. Am I right? Second brain. It's where the majority of our serotonin production and immune function begin, or it keeps everything in check, performing at its best, so I have one less thing to worry about, and I obviously cannot forget Zen. I use it every night. It is certainly why it has become Cure's #1 selling relaxation and sleep product. You know the long nights spent tossing and turning? Yeah, not with this stuff. It has ingredients like reishi mushroom, ashwagandha, magnesium, passion flower, broad spectrum CBD, so thankfully, restlessness is something of the past. Cured Nutrition products are your answer for a daily dose of health. Visit curednutrition.com. That's CURED nutrition.com. Be sure to use the coupon code LOVEBOMBS, and at the checkout you will save 10% off your order. All right. Francis Weller, we are officially recording a podcast. Welcome. Thank you for being here. It's good to see you again.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Jeremy.
So the question I start with most every guest is simply, for those who are listening that have no idea who Francis Weller is, how do you describe yourself? Like, who are you? What's your deal? What are you passionate about?
Well, there's quite a few roads we could travel with that one. What I guess the best, maybe simplest description is I'm a soul tracker. I've spent the last almost 40 years as a psychotherapist and then as a workshop leader, mentor, teacher, writer. But that thread of soul has gone through every piece of my life
Mm.
for the last 4 decades. And so, what I am in love with, what I'm passionate about, is seeing how soul manifests itself in our individual lives, but also our cultural lives, and right now, kind of in our collective lives as a species and as a planet.
Mm. Yeah.
That's kind of what keeps me getting up in the morning.
And we talked briefly before we started recording about the idea of collective grief and all that is happening now. And I would love to dive into that momentarily, but you've presented a sort of an open door of this idea of soul, and you seem to have devoted your life to it. I'm curious if you could describe it, expand on that a little bit. What is soul, and why is it so vital in your opinion?
Well, first of all, we will have no success at all describing this, but I will give you some intimations of what you might feel if you were tracking this. Uh, Soul is more of a way of seeing than it is a physical thing or even a metaphysical thing. I'm not talking about it in some religious sense, but more as a way of orienting your perspectives of life. Soul has a way of taking us down into the depths. We talk about depth psychology, depth therapy. Uh, that was a very deep conversation. So we have these ways of speaking and ways of imagining that bring us down to something below the surface of things. That's where you find soul. You find soul in moodiness and in sorrow and grief, in dream and imagination. You find it in longing for beauty and for a certain vulnerable intimacy with other human beings. We like soul music, soul food. And those things always evoke certain qualities of emotionality, don't they? We feel something in us that moves us. In the old parlance, there was a distinction between soul and spirit, that spirit was rising and ascending. So we have peak experiences, we have visionary experiences, and those are beautiful. We need those. Soul takes us down into the mess, into the, you know, the confusion, in alchemy, they talk about the massa confusa, this massive confusion of being alive. Being human is so damn confusing and so prone to experiences of loss, failure, defeat, shame. And those all bring us to certain qualities of soul. And why I follow it so much is that James Hillman, one of my main teachers, said that soul is kind of like the step sibling in the spirit, self, and soul continuum. Spirit gets a lot of attention in this country. There are spiritual centers all over the United States. You can go to any town, you'll find a meditation center. You'll find self-help books in every bookshelf in every library, but almost nothing about soul. It's begun to get a little bit more of attention of late, thanks to Hellman. And Paul Jung kind of began the resurgence of soul as a word, even in the language. And then Hellman and then Thomas More wrote Care of the Soul back in the 80s, I think it was. And so there's a little bit more attention to it, but I feel almost like it's a necessity to bring that language back into the culture. We could keep going on that topic, but I know you have other.
Oh, I'm happy to what's the thing that comes up for me? Like just chase the rabbit, like the greyhound chasing the rabbit. Like wherever you feel like taking this is more than okay with me.
Let me say one more thing about that. In the old traditions, they would say there was a tripartite cosmos. There was the macrocosm, which was the heavens. There was the microcosm, which was the earth. And then there was a mesocosm, which was the intermediate ground. That was where soul existed. And soul was the intermediary between spirit and matter. When we got rid of soul, spirit became more abstract, matter became dead, and we began to basically decimate the planet because it was just dead matter. There was nothing alive in the forest or in the hills or the streams or the oceans. Animals lost soul in the Middle Ages during the I forget what council that was, but soul was no longer seen as part of the world. It became so intimately interior. And as soul became more and more interior, the world lost soul. And now we are in the condition we're in, which is, crisis situation of having treated the world as dead matter for the past, I don't know, 800,000 years. We need that intermediate layer again.
Yeah, is it too simplistic to suggest that the soul is like a connection to the divine, or like a middleman of sorts in that would you say tripartite? So we've lost the connection, and as a consequence, both parts have eroded in a sense.
Yeah, what soul does in that system is that it allows matter to be sanctified, and it allows spirit to stay related to matter. So spirit matters, and matter is considered holy again. You wouldn't go into a woods and clear cut it because you might be offending the spirit of that place. So you had a much deeper quality of reverence for the world. That's what you find in traditional cultures, is this certain degree of reverence and restraint. Their myths and fairy tales are full of cautionary tales about don't take too many here. Don't take too many fish. They may not come back. Don't, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of hesitation about how we interact with the world because it was imbued with a quality of the sacred. That is gone for the most part now.
Yeah, I remember I listened to your audio series, a couple of them, with a group of friends. And I remember one thing that struck me on this topic was the idea that it's not a binary of sacred and not sacred, but rather sacred and desecrated, in the sense that everything is actually sacred. Is that, did I remember that right?
Yeah, I mean, if our eyes are open and our hearts are receptive, tell me what's not sacred. This flesh is as holy as any place in the universe. This conversation, the materials in this house that shape this little cabin I live in. When we see with those eyes, when soul is indwelling, then everything has a quality of the holy attached to it. And then you don't go in and just clear cut and mountaintop removal and factory farming, and because the animals, the place, the trees, they're all connected to something profound. And I don't want to become idealistic about that, but I do want to say what happens in the absence of that is what we have now, which is a crisis. Things that become desecrated, desacralized. And in that condition, you can do all the damage that we've done.
This might be a potential transition to a different topic. I had Stephen Jenkinson on the podcast, and are you familiar with his work at all? Talks a lot about death and dying, and he referred to our society he described our society as being grief illiterate.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's a way that you would describe it as well, and like, what are the implications of that?
Yeah, I would absolutely say we're grief illiterate, grief phobic, even, that we panic around grief. The consequences of that is that you begin to create a situation in which you do not allow the ripening process to the psyche, which is what grief does to us. It tempers us and deepens us and opens us so that we become more and more sensitive and participatory in the life of the community, particularly the life of the young ones. So when we're grief phobic, we push grief so far to the margins, we become obsessed with all kinds of distractions. I talk about the two primary sins of this culture are amnesia and anesthesia. We forget what it means to be human. And then because of that great forgetting, we rely upon anesthesia. So we are numbed, we're distracted, we are avoidant. And again, the consequences of that is that we become almost possessed by the energies of death. If you look at our culture, we are the highest exporter of weapons. We are also the culture that will go in and destroy anything in our path to feed the avarice of the emptiness that we're struggling with.
Mm.
Part of the circumstance that we're dealing with is that because of all that we've forgotten around ritual, around community, around the sacred, around soul, around belonging, around how to be with one another in times of grief or celebration, there's a profound emptiness that most of us deal with. And we think that emptiness has been caused by some failure on my own watch. Well, it's not a personal failure. That emptiness isn't a reflection of something you've done wrong. It's a reflection of a deep amnesia in the culture. We forgot what soul needs in order to feel vitally alive. And in this absence, this deep emptiness ensues. And then we pursue all the things that we think will satisfy it: power, rank, privilege, wealth, material goods, and more shadowy ways, addictions of all sorts. And if you notice, you can never get enough of these things because they never satisfy. They temporarily assuage. When you get that new iPhone or that new car, this is so cool. And for a moment, you forget the emptiness. But the emptiness shows up again and again and again. And then you need the next phone and the next TV show and the next hit of heroin and the next. We're always trying to kind of to cope with this feeling of emptiness at the core of our being. And I think this is at the heart of our sorrow. This is at the heart of our grief, is that we have been conditioned so thoroughly by the cult of individualism that we have become the loneliest creatures on the planet and the emptiest creatures on the planet. And this is at the heart of racism. This is the heart of gender oppression. This is the heart of misogyny. This is at the heart of the way we treat the planet. This is a core thread that we've not really dealt with at all.
Hmm. And then I suppose the follow-up to that is, so what do we do about that, Francis? Right? And I largely agree with what you're saying. And I imagine that anybody listening to what you just said is nodding along in recognition of this sort of universal truth that you've described there, that I think we all are facing or feeling. And so then this idea of a collective wound, I think is what you're describing. What do we do with that? If we recognize that, I think I've heard you say that the wound is a gateway to intimacy, something along those lines, and intimacy is relevant to connection and trust and whatnot. How do we begin to, am I talking?
No, you're doing good, Jeremy. The wound leads to that if you open the wound, if you get near it. So what do we do with that emptiness, with that profound absence? You begin to ask, what is it that truly satisfies the soul? I mean, we were shaped over hundreds of thousands of years as a species. And during that long process, we figured out bit by bit what it is that shapes a true human being. And those are the things that shaped us, so that when we arrive here, we kind of expect those things to take shape. We come in with the same psychic DNA as our deep time ancestors. We expected 40 pairs of eyes looking back at us in the morning and dancing with us and gathering firewood and doing ritual together and sharing meals and dreams and dealing with hardships together. We didn't think this was going to be a solitary journey. We didn't think we were going to be doing dancing solo. We thought this would be kind of a much more engaged process.
It's like a team sport, right?
Yeah. So what we can do is begin to reanimate those primary satisfactions. That's kind of what my life has been devoted to, is to getting people back into that primal matrix of ritual, song, community, sharing food and dream. That's been my real commitment, is to try to reanimate that matrix. And when people are inside of that matrix, they're not wondering what's on TV tonight. They're not scanning the ads to see what's when they can get the next gadget. They are primarily satisfied. This whole economy would collapse if we went towards primary satisfactions rather than secondary satisfactions. You walk through a mall, 99% of what's in there you don't need. Why is it there? To fill the hole. We buy shit all the time to just try to fill the hole, and it ain't going to work. You need the primary satisfactions to get to that. And this is really, again, at the heart of our grief. When I'm working with groups of men or any community, and we address this feeling of emptiness, what you find after that is deep grief. That you've been living without. You've been living in a shallow grave for much of your life and calling it normal. You've been living in a state of deficit and deprivation and calling it normal and blaming yourself for the condition rather than saying we have to grieve into this hole. If we don't, we're never getting out.
Yeah. It seems so reasonable when you say it that way, to summarize such a big picture problem, so to speak. I think individually, what you touch on there is individual shame, whereby we judge ourselves, we deem ourselves unworthy, not enough, not strong enough, not good enough, because we're trying to take on this entire experience alone rather than collectively as we're designed, right?
Right.
So the game is somewhat rigged against us from the get-go.
Yeah, part of what we have to have deep compassion for is that the conditioning we undergo, I'm talking primarily about white, patriarchal, industrial, technological culture, is that we're conditioned toward, even when we're in a circle of people, we still feel isolated in that circle of people. It is very hard for what we do when we gather for our grief rituals. From the very beginning of the weekend, I talk about we're going to try to learn how to think like a village. That your experience is entangled with mine, is entangled with the elm tree outside, with the turtles, with the cloud. We're entangled with the whole mess of it. And if we could just get a glimpse of that reality outside of our conditioned mind, we might go home different. So you might not grieve this weekend, but so-and-so might. And if that person grieved, we all wept. When you think like a village, you think about what is the communal experience going to be? And how can I support that? So learning to think like a village is also part of our challenge. Is that, like I say, even when we're in a circle of 20 or 40 people, that's 20 or 40 individuals. It's not a community. It takes a lot of work to undo the training of individualism and to begin to think with a communal mind. But when you can, oh my God, belonging becomes accessible. Do you know how many people, I'm sure you know this too, how long we're aching for some place to belong. Someplace that'll just say, yes, come on in. Well, when you begin to think like a village, you begin to realize No, I am a place of belonging. I'm a place I have a house of belonging here I can invite others into. You begin to mature a little bit. That adolescent striving for homecoming, for belonging, has to at some point pivot into you become a place of welcome.
Hmm.
That's thinking like a village.
Yeah, I remember that from your audio series. That part, I think I was on a hike and I stopped walking and just stared at a tree for a minute of like, hang on. This idea of at some stage in your life or in your maturity, you need to go from seeking belonging to actually offering it and providing it to the other.
Yes.
Like, and that I think is a cosmic shift that would create a huge impact.
Well, it just tells you how much our psyches are still adolescent in nature. And I think that's a consequence of individualism. We don't get a chance to really ripen and mature.
Mm.
We're so anxious about, am I good enough? Do I belong? Will they like me? So we spend much of our lifetime fixated on that very small focus. And so in a sense, we never turn and face our life. It's like we're always facing our history and we end up backing into the grave, which is a tragic thing, particularly because that means your medicine really never got employed fully. If the soul came here with a fountain of gifts and you spent your time fixated on, do people like me? Am I good enough? Where's the opportunity for that fountain to spill out and go into the streets and nourish the world? It doesn't happen. So part of our work, again, I think in grieving and dealing with soul is that it has a lot to do with maturation and ripening. Most everything I do also has that twofold thread of original matrix and how do we ripen as human beings so that we can at least have some measure of our full adulthood before we leave this place. And that we can leave knowing I gifted something into the world. I wasn't just a point of extraction.
Mm. And to go back, how we described things as being grief illiterate, like this implies that these skills are teachable, they can be learned. Ideally, there would be elders and mentors around to take us through some kind of initiation process whereby we learn things and we change and we see things differently. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we're lacking?
Well, I think even giving that responsibility to elders is kind of grief stricken right there, because when people gather for our rituals, I say, isn't it strange that we need a workshop on grief? Isn't this utterly bizarre that you've traveled from Australia? You came from England. You came from Canada. You came from Florida. You've traveled sometimes over 10,000 miles for the privilege to weep together. Now, what does that say about our grief and how stricken it is from the commons? So it isn't that we need elders teaching us about grief. We just need our neighbors. We need everyone should be fluent in the language of sorrow because none of us are going to be spared it. I mean, absolutely no one. When you're walking down the street, every pair of eyes you look at, they know sorrow. But they also know that they're not allowed to show it. They're not allowed to even acknowledge it. Whereas we are a happy culture. The United States is an optimistic culture. We're always wanting things to be rising and going up, whether it's the stock market or our penis or something. So it's always got to be going up. And soul takes us down. And we think that means depression. But it's so not depression. Grief is one of the most vitally alive states you'll ever know. It is feral. It is rambunctious. You cannot domesticate grief. When you deny grief, then it turns to depression, it becomes sediment. People come into my practice frequently complaining about depression. And as I'm listening to them, more often not than not, is oppression. It's, layers and layers of untouched sorrow that turns into sediment and just weighs them down to we're barely able to rise up off the ground.
Mm.
And beginning with that, yes, that's what we have to do, is learn the skill of grief. It's like grief is not just an emotion, it's also a core faculty of being human.
Mm.
And when you're familiar with it, when it becomes a companion to you, then joy becomes much more accessible because you're not warding off something constantly. I talk about taking up an apprenticeship with sorrow. And that apprenticeship means recognizing that grief is going to be around you every single day. If you're open to it, whether you're walking the street and you see someone who's homeless, or you hear about something on the news of the latest, violation to humans or more than human world, or about injustices of all kinds, there's grief around us all the time. And if your primary job is to defend against that, then your heart has to close. And you're no longer a participant in the world. You've become a spectator, watching from a distance. The soul did not come here for that. The soul came here for full participation. And I think one of the core griefs we carry is that we live a diminished arc of participation, trying to just get by, to not be found out, to not get hurt, to not be kicked out.
Mm.
So, yes, we can learn the skills of grieving. We have to learn the skills of grieving.
Mm. When you talked about not dealing with, that's too harsh. But when you talk about working with depression or depressed patients, it sounds like what you're describing is that these individuals aren't necessarily numb or feeling too little of things, but rather that they're so filled inside with this pressure that all of these emotions or sensations that have been pushed down and, you said, oppressed, that part of the work or the way forward is to go into that place and let it out. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think the one thing you want to help them do is to begin to reestablish faith in what's there. We are so suspicious of grief. We're so fearful that it's going to take us hostage. I can't tell you how many times I probably said to myself that, if I go near that grief, I'm never coming back.
Mm.
I'm just gonna drown in that ocean of sadness. And what I tell people is that if you don't go there, you're never coming back. It's as if part of our vitality is locked away in the maintenance of that, border between us and our grief. So I slowly help them to give grief a bottom again, and to begin to have faith in it again, and to begin to see that it's actually a place of deep warmth. Our grief is actually directly related to our love, isn't it? We grieve because we loved. We dared to love something.
Mm.
And so if we want to love the world, if we want to participate in loving relationships, then we need to become somewhat fluent in the rites of grief, because the love and grief have been entwined since the beginning.
Mm.
There is no love without loss.
Yeah, I wrote this thing online, I think last year, where I talked about, for a relationship, there's basically three outcomes, which are death, grief, and heartbreak, right? Where you lose them, they lose you, or you go your separate ways. And I think, to your point there, it seems like when we deny that truth, we're missing out on a significant part of living and loving. Yeah.
Mm.
And I'm not entirely sure what to do with that, but maybe maybe you could, as an expert who has decades of experience in this space, to those listening who have been nodding along and who understand and who get it and who are thinking, yes, Francis, that's me. Where is a place where they might begin, or how do you start? Is it as simple as just starting?
I think you start with a friend.
Mm.
And you maybe make an agreement that we are going to talk about loss. We're going to talk about the fear of loss. We're going to talk about all the ways that we cope with not trying to feel the losses in our lives. You begin to kind of peel off the layers of protection and insulation and fear. And you build some confidence that, you feel exactly the way I do. You've also been taught to be distant from your grief and to hide from it. So you begin very small, very simply by breaking the taboos. That we're going to get together, and for God's sakes, please don't give advice. Don't try to fix this. Grief is not something to fix. It's not a problem. It's a truth. The truth is that every human being will know loss, and hopefully every human being will know love, which is not the case all the time. A lot of people don't know love. That's a tragic thing. Another form of grief, right?
Mm.
But that we get together and maybe we make we light a candle, or we say a poem, or maybe we make a little ritual out of it. But we keep it very simple. But we begin to speak honestly about loss in our lives. There might have been a beloved animal that you're just heartsick over, and you never grieved their death, or a grandfather or grandmother, or a relationship that just broke your heart when you were 14 or 16. Those all matter. I think my first real sense of being a human being in the world happened after I finally was able to weep over my losses. Shame closes the heart. That's my wound, shame. So shame really closes the heart to ourselves, to the self. And grief, when there's enough self-compassion to warm that place that's been frozen, and you begin to open up to those losses, and you begin to say they mattered. My losses mattered. That's when, in a sense, you kind of begin to arrive on the planet. That I'm a person here who knows loss, and I am honoring these losses, and I walk amongst you like all other human beings who know loss. Not special, but also not exceptional. I'm not deprived of the right to participate. Grief is in the commons of the soul. It's what we all share in common. And when we get together for grief rituals, it doesn't matter what kind of grief you carry. Loss. It could have been the suicide of a child, or the death of a beloved partner, or a marriage ending, or something. It doesn't matter what the source is. Your heart has been deeply, deeply etched by this grief. And because of that, I can meet you there. We can weep together. And that also is something that profoundly restores our presence in the world, is being able to be side by side with other human beings, grieving together.
I wonder if you might talk briefly about the idea that grief is not necessarily just about people or relationships. So, for example, this came up for me recently. About a week ago, I sold a van. I've had this van for 5 years, and I love this van. It has a bed in it. I've lived in it. I've camped in it. I have memories in it. And I sold the thing, and I was excited to sell it. I wanted to sell it. I got some money. I gave it to a dude that loves it. He's going to treat it so good. And also, I felt grief. And I was talking to my girlfriend about that. And I realized that I was grieving the potential future that having the van offered. I was grieving options. I was grieving opportunities to have future trips in that van. I was grieving the future, so to speak. And I hear this often with clients that they're feeling things, but they don't necessarily recognize it as grief because it's not their grandpa's death or their dog didn't die. Do you mind touching on some of that?
Yeah, well, in the Wild Edge of Sorrow, my book on grief, I talk about the 5 gates of grief. That sitting with hundreds, thousands of people over these years in grief circles, I didn't originally think this, but you begin to hear that no, grief has many, many iterations, many faces. And so these gates began to articulate themselves. The first gate is, losing something you love. I call it everything you love, you will lose is the first gate. You get to keep nothing, not even the van.
Not even the van.
Not even the van. You get to hold on to nothing. That's a fierce truth. That's a heart-wrenching truth that I will lose everything either through my disappearance or yours. That, as you said, I forgot those three you mentioned: heartache, death,
grief.
Yeah, grief. So it's going to happen. And that's the one that someone can say to you, hey, I'm sorry for your loss. That's the only grief that you carry that's acknowledged publicly, communally. The second gate of grief is the places in us that have not known love. So when we're trying to fit into our families, into our education and religion, work settings, peer groups, we get a pretty good glimpse quickly what's approvable, what's not. And so we begin the excise process. I'll get rid of this, I'll get rid of that. I got rid of my sadness, I got rid of my anger, I got rid of my sensuality, I got rid of my, enthusiasm, exuberance. And you create a self that, will get approved of. But every one of those losses is a diminishment in my integrity, in my wholeness. Problem with it is that my severance of these pieces was also accompanied by the same judgments by which they were treated. So I begin to hold them with contempt. I begin to see them as, inadequate, defective, flawed parts of me that if only I didn't have these, then I'd be acceptable. In fact, that's what was the first thing I said to my therapist in my mid-20s. I said to Michael, I said, okay, I want you to help me get rid of some parts of me. That's why I went to therapy. If I could just get rid of weakness, shame, inadequacy, whatever they were, that whole menagerie of brothers of mine, then I would be perfect. I'd be approvable, lovable. Of course, I failed in my mission terribly. So that's the second gate of grief. Well, one more thought about that. The problem, that's what comes in the door of psychotherapy, right? I mean, that's people are coming in because they've lost, in a sense, their essential self. They've lost huge portions of their being. And when you start working with them, the work is really redemption. Is how do I redeem these outcast parts of me? The ones who have been held with contempt, because every loss to your integrity is a source of grief, but you cannot grieve for what you hold with contempt. That's why healing is so hard when you keep judging parts of yourself, because you can't grieve for that. And it's grief that softens the space between you and the outcast part of you. These parts return on the river of your tears. But if I can't grieve for these outcast parts of me, there's no way back. I have to make amends. I have to go to them and apologize and weep with them for how I have treated them, oftentimes for decades. So that's the second gate of grief. The third gate is the sorrows of the world. And this one is becoming more and more prevalent, even in therapy. People are talking slightly less about intrapsychic things and more about what's happening in the world. It's like the patient is no longer me. The patient is the community. The patient is the culture. The patient is the planet. That's where collapse and depression and anxiety and violence, it's all happening there. And if I don't address that, then my own psychic life becomes kind of, again, overwhelmed and inundated by that material. So that gate's touching us constantly because we are part of the world. Any fiction of separation was shattered by the pandemic. Everyone on the planet was affected by this. That ain't a singular event. This was a 7, 8 billion person event. So that's the third gate. The fourth gate is what we expected and did not receive. And this one goes back to the idea that we arrived here basically carrying the shape of our deep time ancestors, expecting all of that material to take place, the rituals, the community, the singing, the sharing of food, all that stuff is expected when we arrived here. And almost none of it materialized. And it becomes this deep grief, this deep emptiness that we have to weep over. And the last gate I talk about is ancestral grief. And the more I sit with ancestral grief, the more I realize that all griefs in some way or another are connected to ancestral grief. That even if my wound is shame because of the way I was treated, well, who treated them that way? And when did this storyline begin? When did we forget that we were holy beings? When did we forget that we were worthy of respect and reverence? And how is it that we come to treat each other this way? And how is it that we forgot that the ground we're walking upon is sacred? So these wounds that we carry, this ancestral grief, it's old, it's ancient, began sometimes thousands of years ago. And then another part of this ancestral grief, particularly for white culture, is what our European ancestors did when they arrived here, the way they treated the indigenous populations here, then the importation of slavery. And you can see that we have not dealt with that. We are still struggling almost every day with the remnants of the untouched grief of colonization, domination. We didn't come here seeking relationship. We came here seeking control. Out of that emptiness. Out of the emptiness. We didn't come sensing our own fullness and relationship, but we came empty. And the whole economic system is driven by how much can I get? And it's never enough. So those are the 5 gates of grief, and we are all affected by these. Most every single day, one of those gates of grief will touch you. And we wonder why it's so hard to go around in our life. And one of the primary difficulties with this is that you're asked to carry this privately. These 5 gates weigh on you, and you're asked to go alone, walking the world with this weight on you. Never once being able to talk about it, address it, much less take it into the ritual space of a grief gathering. Very few of us will have that opportunity.
Yeah, yikes. Well, I'm glad I asked about my van. There was occasionally I'll have this voice pop in my head of like, oh yeah, talk about the van. And then there's another part of my psyche that says, don't tell them about your van. That's silly. Be a professional podcaster, whatever that means. And the more often that I have these conversations, I trust that intuitive hit. I'm like, hey, Francis, I'm going to tell you this weird story about a van. And then you drop this incredible wisdom with these 5 gates of grief. I was smiling partway through your explanation because I was like, I just need to put my hands on my head and think about this for a few minutes now. Like, okay, so we're all carrying around various buckets of grief while pretending that we're not carrying any buckets of grief. And if we happen to see somebody else's bucket of grief, we have to ignore it or shame them or tell them to hide their bucket of grief. And we're all doing this all of the time. That doesn't seem good or sustainable or holy or loving or anything positive. And so when you work with individuals who are dealing with, I think it was that third one, the collective grief, where do you go with that? Because part of me feels like an acknowledgement of the collective suffering perhaps is a step towards honoring that we are a part of that, right? When we talked about trying to acknowledge and heal the collective wound. I think first, an awareness of the grief that we have for that space is almost an invitation or an opening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so then take it away from there, Francis. I mean, what do we, I guess I always go back to like, what do I do? How do I do it? How can we move this forward, et cetera? And it sounds more and more like the how is simply to be and feel and share and be compassionate.
Yeah, I think one of our addictions is the do.
Right.
What do we do about this?
Mm-hmm.
And we bypass the how do I be with this?
Yes, I have a PhD in that, in bypassing that.
So I think the first thing is to stop. I mean, just to come into soul rhythm. And I may have shared that story about geologic speed, my mentor. Do you remember that story?
I do, but they would not.
Just real quickly, when I was licensed very young. I was licensed at 27 years old, and I knew I didn't know anything about sitting with people, but I was smart enough to know I needed a mentor. I needed someone who could help me learn about this complex process. And I met this old man named Clark Berry. He was old. He must have been 60. I mean, so ancient. And first time I sat down with him, he reached over and patted this big rock he had by his chair. He said, "This is my clock. I operate at geologic speed. And if you're going to work with the soul, you need to learn this rhythm because this is how the soul moves." And he pointed to his clock and he said, "It hates this." That was like the most important teaching I've ever received about doing therapy. Because everyone coming in the office is in this urgency to change. And underneath that urgency is frequently self-hatred. And psyche, soul will never participate with an agenda of self-hatred. So teaching them to slow down, to come into a rhythm of deep listening, of regard, of reverence. That teaches them how to be in relationship to soul. I tell people when they come in, I have no interest in solving your problems. What I want to do is help you become more intimate with the one who's bringing the problem to you, calling your attention. And if you can develop an intimacy with soul, most likely those troubles will ease and change, and your life will deepen. So that's the same idea around how do we deal with this collective experience right now? Am I willing to acknowledge it? Am I willing to open to what is happening to the planet? It's borderline overwhelming because our psyches are not designed to process that much ongoing trauma, right? Mm-hmm. We're designed for kind of a communal base, a watershed base that can handle what's happening here. You know, it might be some bad news, but I can handle that once or twice a month or a year. But this is every day. Every day we're getting information. So unless we keep it moving, the old alchemical idea was you have to keep the material warm. If you don't keep it warm, it will harden and congeal and become something frozen in your vessel, in your heart. So keeping it warm, writing about it, drawing it, talking about it with dear friends, going out and weeping on the land, praying for the land, doing whatever you can. Ironically, I would say, Jeremy, that what's happening right now is giving me some, I don't like using the word hope too much, but it may be that the level of denial is finally cracking. And enough people are responding to the sorrows of the world. And it might be the broken heart that saves our ass. It might be because enough people are willing to feel what is happening to this world, which I think is our spiritual soul responsibility, is to be receptor sites to the sorrows of the world. Because if we don't drink those tears, who will? And if we don't respond to the suffering of the world, who will? It's our job. We are the receptor sites. We are the ones who can give language, and we can give response to driving through a clear cut or hearing the news of the latest species disappearance. If we don't respond, they disappear in silence, which is a travesty to creation.
Well, I feel like I could talk to you for a week, but I'm conscious of time, and I feel like that might be a good closing statement. But for those listening who would desire more of your teachings or wisdom, I know you've got a couple of books, but how can they find you? What do you suggest?
The easiest thing to do right now is just go to francisweller.net, and everything I'm doing right now, which is very little, mostly online programs, but there's quite a few recordings, as you were mentioning before. I think material that would be helpful. There's one on apprenticeship with sorrow. There's one on the alchemy of initiation. There's one on living a soulful life and why it matters. It's like I call them the Arts of Life collection. These things together give you some foundation for how to create an artful life, how to walk through this world with some degree of depth, presence, affection, vulnerability. Yeah.
And maybe I'll just offer a testimonial very quickly to those listening, and an idea, because the way that I found you was a buddy of mine, Mark Groves, sent a group text message to a bunch of us guys who are friends and said, "Hey, I'm going to listen to this Francis Weller audio series, and what if we meet once a week to talk about it?" And I was like, who is Francis Weller? What is an audio series? But this sounds great, because I would love to talk to you guys once a week about something deep. And so for those listening, you could also do that, is work through the series. It's so good. Your audio series are outstanding. It's a series of lectures, about 60 minutes to 2 hours each, different topics, but all aligned under the umbrella of a certain larger topic. And we loved it. It gave us a chance once a week to dive in, to have those conversations, to dissect it, to share. And it made us as a group really, really close. And I got to know my friends on a deeper level. And that was really special. So that's my testimonial. So thank you for making it, Francis. And thank you for the work that you do. I think that anybody listening will agree that your words are poetic and poetic medicine. And I just so appreciate you coming on today to have a chat and for doing all that you do.
Thank you, Jeremy. Absolute pleasure. Yeah. I liked how we danced together today.
Look forward to doing it again one day.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
All right,
Francis. Thanks so much.
I mean, this is another example of me being able to say, "I told you so." In the introduction, "I told you so." And Francis delivered in such a huge way. As mentioned, he has various audio series that are so good. I've listened to 2 of them now, the Initiation one and the Alchemy of the Soul, I think it's called. But yeah, totally worth doing. So many big ideas in there. I just adore this man. And as mentioned, I've included links to those in the show notes. You can check those out, get in his space. But yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for following. Thanks for the reviews. And send this to somebody that needs to hear it. Maybe send it to a friend and say, "Hey, this blew my brain apart. Can you listen to it? Can we talk about this?" Maybe put it on Instagram. Be like, "Does anybody want to talk about what just happened on this conversation?" Holy moly. Thanks for being here. I adore you. And I'll talk to you soon.